And what we are discovering through shamanism, through looking at it not through the condescending eyes of the white man who is just impressed by the incredibly droll quaintness of whatever these brown-skinned people have dreamed up, not that, but through a realization that we are sick and no doctor can cure us because we're not that kind of sick. It's soul sickness. I mean, it has to be soul sickness. When you see stuff like Chernobyl or the Kuwaiti oil fields or the Hanford nuclear reservation in Washington, when you realize what this really means, then you realize, this is a mad species. This is a terminally depraved species. And what is required is a return to a model that can heal. And this is what shamanism has always been about. And we have not recognized it because the part of the human being which shamanism addresses, which is the soul and the spirit, we have a 500-year-old tradition that denies that there are such things. So for us, it's absurd, shamanism. It is, painted rattles, guys dancing around in the middle of the night, blowing perfumed water around and smoking too much tobacco. That's shamanism for us, because we cannot see with the eyes that understand. When we do, what we realize is that half of our mind has been taken away from us. That, yes, the human body protrudes into profane space as 120 to 350 pounds of meat somewhere in the universe. But that isn't the domain of humanness. The true domain of humanness is inclusive of that and much, much more, because the true domain of humanness is a domain that honors the mind as self and as landscape. I mean, you are a creature loose in a landscape of meaning, and you are that landscape of meaning. And by losing contact with this, we have become essentially pathological, very needy. This is a typical pattern in a person with an abused childhood. They become very, very needy, very thing-oriented, very security-conscious, very anxious. This is a picture of us and our psychology. And we are so deep into the historical nightmare that we can't ever remember any other way of doing business. I mean, we know we're messed up. We know we're unhappy. But what's to be done, I mean, we have a million minor fixes and people peddling all of these things. I mean, you've just been through the aisles. You know what I'm talking about. But somehow salvation itself becomes an impediment to salvation. I mean, once you see 500 forms of salvation being sold at prices you can't afford, the very notion of salvation becomes obscene. It becomes one more layer in the obscene layering that takes meaning out of life and disempowers us and turns us into a subscription customer. That seems to be how we always are being forced to end up. Well, the only way out of this, I think, is it takes courage, because you have to turn your back on your culture in the most profound sense there is, because there are many ways to turn your back on your culture. I mean, if everyone's wearing gray, you can wear green. That's one way to turn your back on a culture. But another way is to break its laws. Now that's a little more serious and, brings in big philosophical issues. But in fact, the culture is an enormous arrow pointing, go this way. And you know what lies that way? Impoverishment, madness, degradation, and death. That's where the culture is pointing. You can see it. You can see it. Just look where we're headed. If everyone on earth aspires to the kind of lifestyle that you people can enjoy by virtue of having paid the money to be at a scene like this, there isn't enough glass, metal, and plastic in the planet to make that many Celicas and jaguars and bluebirds and snowbirds and all the rest of this crap. So what is needed is an awakening. Now, I mentioned earlier in this talk that in the 50s, before they interfered with LSD research, they were curing chronic alcoholism with a single 500 gamma dose of LSD. Well, now, for heaven's sake, nobody is suggesting that LSD is a cure for alcoholism. That, to me, is absurd. It's not a cure for alcoholism. It's a cure for stupidity. And a person who is killing themselves by drinking themselves to death takes 500 mics of LSD and says, "What a stupid person I am. I'm killing myself." And so then they look at their behavior and they cease that behavior. And this is what has to be done on a societal scale. And it is not as difficult as we may wish to be assured by the establishment. The whole falderall and hoop-de-doo about the 1960s was that the crypto-fascist bullshit agenda was damn near overthrown by a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds on campuses scattered around the high-tech world. The male-dominant agenda is so fragile that any competitor is felt as a deadly foe. And the fact that these ideas will not die, in spite of the fact that, they've raised the price of an ounce of weed from $15 to $500. They've made the pinch for growing weed from a slap on the wrist to lose everything you ever owned or dreamed of owning. And they cannot push it into extinction. It's because it's so much older than their con game. They've invented their con game post-Sphinx or something, and we're talking about a reality that reaches back 15, 25, 30,000 years. And it's a reality, so far, I've only spoken, I keep trying to get to this subject, but I won't let myself for some reason. So far, I've spoken of it as boundary dissolving, promoting group sexual activity, this and that and the other thing. But those are like generalizations. What is really interesting about the psychedelic experience is it shows you a mental universe that you not only never suspected existed, but that you could not have suspected existed. I don't think there's another way to it. I mean, I'm not ready to categorically say there's no other way to it. And occasionally, especially at gatherings like this, people grab me and assure me there are other ways to it. And they say, if you I want you to meet Babaji. He's as good as psilocybin. And, oh, really? I want to meet this man. because let me say a little bit more about this. I would like to believe that in principle you could get to these places on the natch. Only in principle, however, because if some people say, well, these things you describe on DMT and psilocybin, I can show you how to do that naturally. No, thank you. Are you kidding? Thank God I have the drug as a kind of marker so that I know when I'm getting close to that stuff. If I woke up one morning in that place and I couldn't tell myself I'd taken mushrooms, I would define myself as seriously discombobulated and wait to see what happens, you know. And people say, well, don't you think you ought to be able to do it by yourself? And I love this question because the answer is you can't do it by yourself. That's the entire message of the last 10,000 years of human history. The self is insufficient. The ego will not suffice. The only way you're ever going to get anywhere is you must humble yourself to the point where you admit that you can't do it unless you have help from someone whose idea of home is a cow flop. If you're willing to humble yourself to that degree, then maybe we can get somewhere.